The iconic Disneyland in Anaheim, California welcomes millions of guests through the gates each year to entertain and delight with thrilling rides, character meets, and just a general feel of magic in the air. But guests and even cast members may get more than they bargained for at Disneyland, as it seems to be one of the most haunted theme parks in the world. And you'd think that the ghosts would head for the oldie-worldy areas, right? A touch of nostalgia being the perfect backdrop for a bit of the paranormal? That doesn't seem to be the case entirely, because today we're talking about the strange goings-on in Tomorrowland. So there doesn't seem to be any secret around the fact that Disneyland appears to be incredibly haunted. Some cast members claim that at least 80% of the park, the attractions, the shops, restaurants, everything, has at least one ghost story attached to it. And they're in every single area too, from a woman in a white dress seen walking down Main Street, to a faceless man who appears sitting in empty ride seats next to guests. And obviously I want to tell you all of the stories, but that would be literally impossible in one video, so we're gonna have to go land by land, and we're starting off in Tomorrowland of all places. Tomorrowland was one of the original lands that was built for the park's opening in July 1955, with the initial designs referring to Tomorrowland as the world of tomorrow, set in the not too distant future of 1986. But on that opening day, not everything was completely ready. In fact, Tomorrowland was the least finished area out of the entire park. As opening day had been rapidly approaching at the rate of knots and there wasn't enough money left over, they just had to cut their losses and make the best of it, using the unfinished space for random exhibits like Bathroom of the Future, which, an important thing to note, was not a functional bathroom. Do not go peeing in the exhibit. By 1959 though, they were able to start putting a little bit of money behind Tomorrowland and added a couple of new attractions, including the Disneyland Alweg monorail system, which will become important later. Also, just an interesting little bit, it was during this do-up that the Matterhorn bobsleds were added into Tomorrowland. But you Disneyland aficionados out there will know that that ride is now officially part of Fantasyland. Just some useless bit of trivia that you can bore your kids with the next time you make the trip, I don't know. Tomorrowland has obviously been through multiple different updates and renovations, adding and changing rides, and I saw this quote in one of the books and it said something along the lines of, Disneyland is always constantly evolving. It's almost like a living, breathing thing in and of itself that keeps transforming and shifting as the years go on. You could go one year and then return in say like 5 or 10 years and things are different. There's something new to see, which makes it all the more interesting that a place like Disneyland is rumoured to be as haunted as it is. You sort of get used to the narrative that ghosts haunt old places that are still standing in more or less the same capacity as they were a long time ago. But clearly, that doesn't appear to be the case here. And I want to make sure that I cover as many of the ghost stories from Tomorrowland as I can, so we're going to go on a bit of a tour around, starting with what began as a Tomorrowland ride, but eventually became a bona fide mode of transport around the park, the monorail. Because it opened in 1959 as just that, it was an attraction that took you sightseeing just around Tomorrowland. But then in the 60s, they spied an opportunity. We've created this transportation system, why don't we use it to transport people? So they expanded the track and started using the monorail to transport people between the park and the Disneyland Hotel. Smart, right? Unfortunately, the monorail was a site of a horrific accident. You know when they play that please stay seated and keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, like bit of safety spiel over the loudspeaker? They're not doing it to be a bummer, they're doing it to make sure you stay alive. I don't know, maybe listen to what they're saying and don't do the things that they're warning you not to do. As one teenager unfortunately found out the hard way. On the 17th of June 1966, when 19-year-old Thomas Guy Cleveland was trying to sneak into the park for grad night, which is basically where Disneyland is open to high school students who are graduating. They'll have the park to themselves after it's closed to the public, and then it goes on until the early hours of the morning as well. And seemingly, Thomas wanted to join in. Maybe he'd had mates in the graduating class that year. He was 19, so surely he would have graduated the year before, and so wouldn't have been able to get in 1966. But he just thought he could get in and probably join his mates by popping over the fence and across the monorail track. Say it quick, sounds easy. Thomas was spotted though by a security guard. The security guard was there shouting at Thomas like, you need to get down, it's not safe. Thomas thought he was in trouble, which, I mean, he probably would have been, and so he started running away from the security guard. But he was actually just trying to warn him that a train was coming. Thomas tried to get clear of the train by climbing down onto a fiberglass canopy underneath the track, but it still wasn't enough clearance. The monorail train hit him, killing him instantly and dragging his body 30 to 40 feet down the track before the train was finally able to stop. And since then, people have reported seeing the apparition of a young man running along the monorail tracks about where Thomas was killed. And it's not unusual for cast members, especially if they're new and they don't know the story, to see a figure standing on the track. They'll slam the brakes on hard, but the figure disappears just before you hit him. Other times, when security is called to a report of a man on the monorail tracks, they'll obviously go and check it out just in case it isn't anything paranormal, but sometimes they'll check out the track, no person running about up there, they can't see anything, but they will hear the disembodied sounds of someone crying. And from the looks of the reports, it seems like Monorail Red has the most weirdness tied to it. I don't know which particular train struck Thomas. If it was Monorail Red, it would have been the Mark II version, which went out of service in 1969. And I don't know what time period these next reports come from. I think they're fairly recent, because one of the books I used included a quote from a Disneyland cast member that said, "To this day, cast members piloting Monorail Red will see this figure standing on the track, staring head on at you, as you have no other option than to go through him." And the book was published in 2012, so there's no way it would be anywhere near the same train that was involved in Thomas's accident, but it's just interesting now that this particular train seems to be the one with the most activity. So much so that even when Monorail Red is in the workshop, the apparition of the young man is apparently seen in there too. But let's get on to some of the actual Tomorrowland rides, because there are some wild stories, and maybe even a few recurring characters. First of all, we've got to talk about the OG ride, Autopia, because it is one of the last few rides in the entire park that was right there on opening day in 1955 and is still in operation today. And there is a bit of an urban legend with Autopia, because it's said that a previous landlord, back from the time when the park was just orange groves, he had been approached by Walt Disney asking to buy his land. To which the farmer had replied, no, over my dead body will you build that amusement park. So what happened? Allegedly, he's buried somewhere around Autopia, and so the amusement park was built over his dead body. And so now he's supposed to haunt the area. There isn't any mention of what he does, whether people have actually seen him or anything like that. And there is also no evidence that this is actually the case. And so it's probably just a story. But one bit of weirdness that I do have a little more time for on Autopia is the story of a ghostly little girl in white. And she's apparently been seen walking through the trees around Autopia's track. And it's said that on 3 separate occasions, cast members have shut down the ride because they saw what looked to be a guest out there on the edge of the track. But when someone goes to investigate, they try and find this little lost girl that's made her way into somewhere that she shouldn't. There's never anyone there. And even though we may not know the identity of that particular alleged apparition, we do know a little bit more about what could potentially be going on in the Tomorrowland Expo Centre. And this particular spot, it's been through quite a few changes over the years. It first started out as the Carousel of Progress in the 60s, which was originally an attraction that debuted at the New York World's Fair, which you might remember us talking about a little bit in part 2. But this attraction showed basically how things have progressed throughout the 20th and 21st centuries with bits of tech that's made our lives easier. And the Carousel of Progress was actually shipped off to Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom in the 70s, and America Sings opened up in its place in Disneyland in June 1974. And this was an attraction that demonstrated the history of music throughout the first 200 years of the USA, but less than 2 weeks after opening, there was a horrible accident. There was a fairly new cast member, Deborah Gale Stone, who was 18 years old, and she was operating America Sings. And the thing about this attraction is that it is set up as a rotating theatre, where the audience will be sitting in sections that rotated to show different sets and scenes. For some reason, as the audience seating area was rotating to move into position for the next cycle, Debbie got stuck between the moving wall of the audience section and the stationary stage and was crushed. Apparently guests in the crowd heard a scream, and they were obviously very quickly evacuated off the ride. And cast members who were there say that her arm was sticking out into the next room, but because of the security system that kind of like locks the rotating bit, it took a few hours before they could get Debbie's body out. After that, immediately the ride was shut down and the walls were replaced with breakaway wall panels, so no one else would get trapped like Debbie did. And after that, America Sings carried on operating until 1988 when it was finally closed, and the building was apparently used as an office space for something like 10 years, but in 1998, Innoventions was opened, which showcased technology that was available or would soon be available to help improve day-to-day life. So kinda like almost harking back to the Carousel of Progress days, but instead of talking about innovation through history, it's looking a little bit more ahead into the future. But then in 2015, the building opened as the Tomorrowland Expo Centre, which serves the dual purpose of being the Star Wars launch bay downstairs, as well as a superhero HQ upstairs for character meet and greets, and you can see the Iron Man suits and all that sort of stuff. But while it was operating as Innoventions, there were some strange things reported, because it allegedly appeared like Debbie was still around, trying to do her job as best she could. Cast members who were working the attraction would report hearing a disembodied voice telling them to be careful, and if you said her name out loud when no one else is around, she might even even reply to you. But then other times, if there was anything out of place that might be against health and safety, anything like that, Debbie might have something to say about it. Doors that were left open would close by themselves. Even things like chairs left out in the middle of a walkway would allegedly be pushed back underneath the desk where they came from. Other people mentioned that they would be overwhelmed with a sense of dread and doom, but I don't know, is that more to do with just knowing the story of Debbie? Maybe. Electrical devices seem to do weird things in here though. The fire alarms would apparently be triggered in here more than anywhere else for no reason. And once the Innovations attraction stopped working properly, and when cast members went to try and figure out what had happened, they found wires physically pulled out of the locked control panel with no explanation. No one would have any reason to do that. Whether it's all the doing of Debbie, whether there's something else going on here, we just don't know. But there was apparently a wall in the basement where cast members would write a message to Debbie on this wall when they first started working there. I don't know, that just seems like a really nice thing to do for a colleague who unfortunately passed away while she was trying to do her job. So it would be really interesting to know if, one, that basement wall is still there, if cast members are still honouring Debbie in this way, because I do think it is just a really sweet thing to do. But two, are they still experiencing weird things in the expo centre? So if you've been since 2015 and you've experienced something a bit weird in there, please do let me know in the comments. But one attraction that is still relatively unchanged since its opening in 1977, and surprise surprise has ghost stories attached to it, is Space Mountain. It was actually planned to open much earlier than it did. It was originally going to come to Tomorrowland ready for the 1967 revamp, but after Walt Disney's passing, the project was shelved. Not for a ridiculous amount of time though, as the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World in Florida, they got their version of Space Mountain in 1975, and after the huge success there, Disneyland unveiled their Space Mountain in 1977. And there are allegedly a couple of ghosts that are rumoured to haunt this ride. The first is known as Disco Debbie, who is no relation to Deborah Stone from America Sings, but she's nicknamed Disco Debbie as apparently when this female apparition manifests, she has a faint green glow to her, and it's thought that she was a cast member who died of an aneurysm behind the building in 1979. However, there is another version of this story, again set in 1979, who says that Debbie was actually a woman called Cheryl Ann Hoffman, who after riding Space Mountain became really ill. She was so bad she couldn't stand up, she couldn't get out of the rocket, so cast members told her, don't worry, stay where you are, we'll remove the vehicle from the track so we can help you, while also allowing the ride to continue. There seemed to have been a bit of a miscommunication though. The other cast members at the control panel didn't know this particular rocket needed to be removed, and so this guest, Cheryl, was sent around the ride again. When she came back to unloading, she was so much worse than before, barely even conscious now. She was extracted from the rocket and taken to the hospital, where she spent a week in a coma before passing away. The coroner found that she had an atrial myxoma, which is basically a heart tumour that had detached itself from her heart and made its way through to the blood vessels in her brain. But whoever Disco Debbie is, a lot of people lean towards her being a cast member, as she's usually spotted in areas where guests aren't allowed. And I don't know, the story of Cheryl is actually backed up by a coroner's report and a lawsuit filed by her husband after her death, which was actually dismissed in the end. But I think with seeing how Deborah Stone's death was treated amongst colleagues even now, we would know more about this cast member who'd had the aneurysm if that was the case. But Disco Debbie isn't the only apparition that's been spotted in Space Mountain, because there's also Mr. One Way. And guests who encounter him a lot of the time at the start of the interaction, they're none the wiser that they're actually having this allegedly paranormal experience, because he likes to get into the spare seat next to guests who are riding alone. Okay, no problems there, so far, all good. But as you've gone through the ride and you pull into the unloading area, you'll look next to you, and this mysterious rider has disappeared. Kind of like, oh, I know how this one ends, I don't need to go all the way through, and he just dips out halfway through. I actually found a story of someone who had apparently had an encounter with this entity. They were about 12 years old and had gone to Disneyland in 2002, all on their own, and had just got themselves onto the Space Mountain ride. And they actually remembered enough about this guy to say that he was friendly, approachable, he had reddish hair, and he was clean shaven, and basically looked like he'd just walked out of the 1960s. They don't remember the specifics of the conversation, but they do remember how nice he was. Just a kind stranger chatting to a kid while they waited for the ride to start, you know? As the ride got going, they were having a great time, and they just reached the part where they take the photo of you screaming bloody murder, when they turn to look at the kindly stranger in a, isn't this the most fun ever kind of way, and they were utterly shocked to see that he had completely disappeared. The seat next to them was empty. Other guests, even when they don't see anything, they sometimes report a cold hand holding theirs while they're riding alone. As to who this guy is, we don't really know. There is a story, and I have a feeling that it's more urban legend than anything else, but some believe that Mr. One Way was a guest who had a heart attack and died on the ride not long after it had opened. But no evidence, no names, you get it. Mr. One Way is one of the more well-known entities that is said to haunt Space Mountain, but I also did come across a story of a faceless mechanic, which is just as terrifying as it sounds, because some cast members claim to have seen a guy wearing the old Disneyland mechanic's uniform walking through the ride. When they go to see who he is, why he's out there, they come face to face with him, and they realise this man doesn't have a face, just a shadow where his face should be. And his origin story is that he was a mechanic working on Space Mountain just as it was about to open, and for some reason, another cast member who didn't know that there was anyone out there on the track came and turned the ride on to test it, because back then apparently they didn't have the 2-key safety system. There was no way of knowing until the test ride came back through to unloading, dragging the body of the mechanic, who was lying on the tracks face down. Again, no evidence, most likely just an urban legend, but still terrifying to think that people have seen a faceless entity within Space Mountain. But it's not just the ride itself that's said to be haunted. Oh no! Because the female cast member locker room that's inside Space Mountain, that's got some creepy reports coming out of it too. Apparently, a lot of cast members over the years, when they're in there alone, late at night, grabbing their stuff after their shift, they'll just start feeling super weird in there. And that alone is whatever, isn't it? Your mind can wander, play tricks on you, just send your imagination into overdrive. But when other things start happening, in particular, you might hear a disembodied voice say something right behind you that you can't quite make out, and then the door that leads out onto the ride will open and close completely on its own. That would certainly make you want to grab your stuff as fast as possible and get out of there, right? And it seems like even galaxies far, far away aren't safe from the paranormal. In 1987, Disneyland opened the first Star Wars themed attraction at the park, Star Tours, which I think is a brilliant name. I love it. It was updated in 2011 and gives you this immersive motion simulator ride through different scenes and planets from the Star Wars universe. And they're all randomized as well, so you might not go through the same scenes if you ride it again, which I think is such a good idea. But cast members have reported weird things happening in Star Tours. One was opening up one morning and heard the disembodied voice of a child speaking quite softly behind them. Thing was, the park wasn't open at that point, so it couldn't have been a guest, and when they spun around to look who it was, there was no one there. Shadow figures have also been seen throughout the attraction, with cabin 4 seeming to be a bit of a hotspot. Apparently, a face has been witnessed appearing in darker areas of the ride, with the cabin doors opening and closing on their own. Some have even allegedly seen a full apparition of a little boy within this cabin. And then elsewhere in the attraction, other cast members have heard disembodied footsteps. And even things like cleaning supplies have been moved when they know for a fact that they left them in a particular area. Alongside Star Tours, the souvenir shop, the Star Trader, also opened up in the 80s. And the sheer number of stories from this place. Put it this way, I would not like to be a cast member working in this building. The Star Trader was one of the biggest reasons why I chose to do Tomorrowland as the first land to cover. As in every book, every forum, every Reddit thread where cast members were sharing their own personal experiences, there was someone who had something to say about the Star Trader. And most of it centers around the stockroom upstairs. Time after time, I came across stories of cast members feeling terrified in this room, refusing to go in there alone, and just having a horrible sense of dread, like somebody is watching that definitely does not like you in their space. Other cast members have claimed that they've felt like they've been pushed down the stairs as they're trying to walk up to the stockroom. And I didn't realise how big of a building we're talking about here, but the stockroom above the shop, that's 3 floors high. It's huge. So if you get freaked out on the top floor, you've got a long way to go before you get back to the relative safety of other people on the shop floor. As one cast member found out at the end of their shift in the most terrifying way, as they were prepping for an inventory that they had coming up. There was only him and a colleague in the shop at the time. They were the only ones in the Star Trader. And the guy just goes, right, I'm going to go up into the stockroom and sort out up there. He heads right on up to the top floor of the stockroom and climbs a little stepladder to do whatever it is he needed to be doing up there. And that's when the weirdness starts. He initially notices like the lightest little touch on his back. Barely anything. If it was any other time, he probably wouldn't have noticed it. But he did. Whether it's because he knew he was alone in the notoriously haunted stockroom, or maybe it's just because he's got his head screwed on and he thinks it's his colleague. Either way, he turns around to see that no one is there. Okay, no worries. It could have just been a body sensation, clothes creasing funny, I don't even know. Whatever, it doesn't matter, go back to work. Then he feels another touch on his back. This time a little bit firmer. So it's not the same sensation as before, it's getting a little harder to mistake. He turns around again, still there's no one there. Okay, not feeling super cool about this, so he starts to get a little nervous, but surely there's a rational explanation. So again, he carries on, until this time he feels the unmistakable sensation like someone has just taken their finger and drawn a squiggly line up and down his back. Nope! We're done here, invisible thing that keeps touching me. Thank you and goodbye. That is enough. He jumps off the stepladder, starts legging it down the stairs. As he's making his hasty escape, he can't help but notice that the lower 2 floors of the stockroom are in complete pitch black. The lights have been switched off. At this point, it's full-on horror movie mode. He runs all the way back down to the shop floor and finds his colleague and asks her why the hell she turned off the lights. Her response? She hadn't even been near the stockroom since he'd left. She'd been busy doing other things. No reason those lights should have been switched off. Terrifying. Other cast members have claimed that objects in both the stockroom and the shop itself have moved on their own. The disembodied laughter of children has also been heard long after the park has closed and all the guests have gone home for the night. And some have even claimed to witness the apparition of a woman dressed in a long Victorian dress walking through the shop. I don't even know. If I was a cast member, could I request a transfer out there? Is that even a thing at Disneyland? I want to transfer out because of a ghost. Because I don't think I could handle it, if I'm honest. But there is one more attraction that I want to mention, and it's actually not even in Tomorrowland anymore, but there are a few remnants there if you know what you're looking at. I'm talking about the People Mover, or as some cast members with a deliciously dark sense of humour apparently like to refer to it as, the People Remover. This attraction opened as part of Tomorrowland's big overhaul in 1967, and it ran until 1995. But during its time of operation, unfortunately 2 guests lost their lives. The first was in 1967, just a month after it had opened, when a 15-year-old called Ricky Lee Yama decided he wanted to try and jump between the 2 People Mover cars. He didn't quite make it. Apparently he'd reached out to grab onto his girlfriend's blonde ponytail as he was just trying to scramble to save himself, but he fell onto the track where the next train of cars crushed him and dragged his body for a few hundred feet before the ride was able to be stopped. The second incident happened in 1980 when 18-year-old Gerardo Gonzalez tried to do exactly what Ricky had attempted. He was trying to jump between cars. Unfortunately, just like Ricky, Gerardo didn't make the jump, fell onto the track and was again crushed and dragged under the next train. And it's thought that now these 2 teenagers haunt the old People Mover ride. And there's a little abandoned corridor above the Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters that used to be the tunnel for the People Mover, but now cast members, if they ever find themselves in that tunnel, especially female blonde cast members, they will report the sensation of their hair being pulled. Apparently, similarly to the monorail, the figures of these teenagers have been seen standing on the People Mover track too. But other apparitions have also been seen up here. Cast members have sometimes seen the figure of a little girl, who some say is the same girl that haunts Autopia, but others have claimed to see the apparition of a little boy instead. And he's been seen so often, by guests too, in broad daylight while the park is open. So obviously they're very concerned that a lost child has made his way up onto the tracks, that the cast members have to reassure them that actually there is no one up there, because whenever they go and check, they never find anyone. And sometimes you don't even need to be in an attraction within Tomorrowland to encounter something unexplainable. Apparently the disembodied voice of a woman has been heard around one of the land's ice cream carts, well past closing time once all of the guests have gone home. And there's no explanation as to what or who this could be. You can't make out what she's saying, and it's only around this one particular cart. Although the book that I found that story in doesn't say which one. Is that an excuse to visit them all, maybe? So the next time you return the Rebel in Space tours, or you get to meet Thor in the Superhero HQ, keep an eye out in the dark, quiet corners, because you may come face to face with a figure of a guest who can never leave, or even a ghostly cast member who doesn't know their shift ended decades ago. And before I get into my thoughts, I need you to stick around to the end for this one, because I've got something very exciting to share with you. And of course, I also want to know what you think first. Tomorrowland. Haunted? Because for me, just like the rest of the park, it's a yes from me. It's like I said last week, I think the energy that guests bring into the park each day, and their emotional energy from the thrills and spills of exciting rides and seeing their grand total at the souvenir shops, I think that amplifies whatever is going on here from a residual haunting standpoint. And then I think the stories like Debbie Stone from America Sings, that just adds a whole new layer to the whole thing. It's kind of like at this point, with everything that's happened here, it would make sense that Tomorrowland is haunted. And so then the sheer scale of reports from guests and cast members just kind of goes some way to confirming that in my mind. But I always want to know your opinion, so do let me know in the comments. I also do feel kind of like this part 3 played Disneyland's hand a little bit. Not Disneyland itself necessarily, but more the reputation that it's got. And what I'm referring to here is the pretty stark difference between an actual documented death that we have records of and a death that's just rooted in urban legend. Especially when it comes to the death of a cast member. Because I mean, poor Debbie, we know who she is. We know how she died. We've got newspaper records of the incident. We've also got the story of the basement wall that cast members say they've seen with their own eyes. Okay, we've not got photos of the wall, but you know what I mean. There's no denying that on that day in 1974, a cast member died at Disneyland. I know Disneyland's got this weird reputation where they cover up deaths and no one dies at Disneyland and all of that, but it's just not true, is it? We've got Thomas and Debbie and Ricky and Gerardo just in this episode alone, not even counting Cheryl, who lost consciousness at Space Mountain and then died later on. And what I'm trying to get at here is like the story of Mr. One Way. If he was a guest who died of a heart attack, or he was a mechanic who died on the ride, we would have evidence of it. So I'm fully inclined not to believe the stories where there aren't any newspaper articles or coroner reports or even lawsuits available. But if I've missed something, then please do not hesitate to let me know. But for now, that is the 3-part story of the allegedly obscenely haunted Disneyland. There was so much to this story, and you know me, I just can't stop talking, so I had to make this a 3-parter. But there is so much more I could have said, so many more claims and witness reports from each area of the park. And then you've got Disneyland's California Adventure, which is a whole other park in itself on the site, which is, you guessed it, haunted. Disneyland Hotel, that's got stories attached to it too. I could have talked for weeks about this, but I'm not a Haunted Disneyland channel. I'm an Everything Has a Ghost Story and I need to talk about them all channel, and so there are plenty more places for me to get onto. So that's going to be it from me on Disneyland for now, and if there's enough interest, maybe I'll revisit around Halloween time again next year if you fancy hearing more. And before I get onto the announcement, please do give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already and you like what I'm doing over here. I'm already planning next year's stories as there are so many I need to tell you about. So that is all from me today on Ghost Stories. However, you're not going to have to wait an entire week for your fix of history and hauntings. Oh, no. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but it's December in a couple of days, and I have something incredibly exciting dropping on the 1st of the month. It is the long-awaited on-location episode where I take you on a little walk through the extremely haunted Epping Forest, which was made possible through my collaboration with the absolutely brilliant Eulogy Media. And if that isn't enough to get you all excited for the Halloween season, don't you worry, because a lot of you say to me, Claire, the stories you cover are great, but there just aren't enough of them. And to that I say, happy Halloween, because throughout the month of October, I'm going to be telling you a good old ghost story, Don't Scare Claire style, every other day. That is 16 videos I am treating your eyeballs with throughout the next month, culminating in, obviously, a very special Halloween episode to round off the month on All Hallows Eve. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre all throughout October. So until next time, sleep safe. There's so much noise outside. Mr. DSC is getting his car cleaned right now. I've got loads of packages arriving for various different things. The cat is just screaming at me all day. It's going great. We're doing good. We're having a good time. Having a good time. All the hard work's done. I've done the research. Just need to talk about it now.